Hi, everyone. This is Grant at Cause Artist. Welcome to episode 232 of the Disruptors for Good podcast. Today, we dig into passing down what matters, not only money, but meaning. I am joined by Randy Frisch, co-founder and CEO of Trusty, a modern way to create a digital letter of wishes. So the things you love end up with the people you love. Trusty lets you snap a photo of an item, AI fills in the details, you assign an error, and you leave a short video message that explains the why. You can upload your will and related documents, get a plain language summary, and ask questions through an AI agent that understands your plan. And you can invite family and advisors to collaborate, name charities as beneficiaries, and mark sentimental value, all protected with bank grade security and a clear promise that your data is never used for model training. Links to Trusty and our write up are in the show notes. If you enjoy the episode, please follow the show and leave a quick review. It really helps. All right, let's get into the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Randy, for joining me today. Super excited to chat, man, about your journey, about what you and the team are building at Trusty. Really, really cool sector that you're building in. And, it's kind of one of those products you see and you're just like, this makes complete sense. How has this not been sort of built at this level before? So before we get into Trusty and everything you're doing, talk a little bit about your journey, man. You've multiple time founder. So you've been in this stage before of starting with a little bit of money raised and building a product, but talk about your journey before Trusty.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Grant, thanks for having me here. Excited to be on. And it's funny because, you asked about my last venture, not that it was not a good venture or anything wrong with it, but it was definitely not as emotional and heartfelt as some of the things that we're solving here with Trusty. And it's funny, like I had that venture, which I'll tell you about for over 10 years. And, my wife kids that she could never explain what in the world I did. Like we'd be out and, her and someone else who's, my co-founder, the spouse, they would look at each other and be like, we don't know. So now everyone understands this is very relatable. We'll talk a little bit about all the reasons that someone needs to think about what lives outside the will and some of the things that we're doing around estate planning. But to answer you, my venture into tech started back in 2012 when I started a company called Uberflip. It was a marketing technology solution. I very much consider myself a marketer, and I was struggling to get things online for, kind of go to market motions. And I was kind of the motivation for what we ended up building, which was an easier way for a marketer to not have to get into the weeds of a CMS. We helped with a lot of content marketing functionalities and scaled that business. It was a very B2B play. So really amazing brands like Amazon would be using our product in how they brought on customers. But it was a very different product, very different world. The one thing that kind of aligns to what I'm doing now, I'd say, is like there was a big focus on just making things easier and creating a great experience. That was a word that I would always talk about. I actually wrote a book about experience and marketing. And trying to bring some of that into this new venture.
Amazing, man. So I know just reading a little bit of the backstory, there's emotion in this product, right? It was sort of that, I think something we all hope we imagine one day as we get sort of a aha moment, and it could come in a dark time in your life, and that just, happens to all of us. But, talk about that sort of emotional experience where maybe Trusty, you got the seeds of Trusty that came out of that. Talk a little bit about the origin story and we'll get into what it is.
So there's two very, very upbeat, but still one is end of life, to your point, moments where I realized that this was a need. And, so kind of the timeline where we were just talking about, I sold my last business a couple of years ago. And I had, strong intention to do nothing but, hang around my kids and my wife and, just take it easy for a bit. But I had this, I guess, romantic idea that some people kind of laugh at now because it really spurred this idea. And the idea was that on my last day of that last business, before I transitioned out, I was going to stop on the way home and buy my wife a nice present to say thanks for all of her support. Anyone who's started a venture knows that it's a family thing, even if it's not a family business. So I bought my wife's, a nice bracelet. And I guess I spent enough that they gave one of those appraisal docs for, the diamonds and things like that were part of this bracelet. Similar to when you get engaged, you get that kind of, you bring it home
Yep.
for insurance purposes. You're supposed to hold on to it. And I threw it in the drawer that we're in today, in this office we're in today, rather. this was my first day with nothing to do. And I wasn't thinking of a business. I just thought, you know what? This drawer is filled with a whole bunch of things that we've bought. My wife and I have been married almost 20 years. I thought to myself, I'm going to organize this drawer in the next couple of weeks. That's going to be a project. I was looking for a lot of projects, but this was going to be a project. And it had things like art certificates in our house and, different, my wife's got a couple handbags, nothing too crazy, no Birkins in our house, but some fancy stuff, I guess. And I just felt like this stuff was important. It actually occurred to me in that moment that we had just recently redone our will and none of this stuff was mentioned in the will. So that was kind of in the back of
Gotcha.
my head, but I
Yep.
wasn't yet thinking about productization of this idea. It was just more something that I had a little bit of concern with. So that was kind of the first moment where my brain started to swirl a bit and realize that there was a gap. The second thing that's a little bit more of a mover in terms of pushing forward was I had a grandmother who passed away. She was 104 years old, so an amazing mom.
Incredible.
Can't ask for much more. And she had a really well-established state as a high net worth individual herself and my grandfather. And everything was really clear in terms of, what's typically defined as the estate around, bank balances and property and things of that nature. She also had a lot of these really nice personal belongings, some of which had, a lot of, monetary value and some had a lot of sentimental value. And there was 3 kids, 3 times that many grandkids,
Sure.
great grandkids, given she was 104. Everyone wanted something, and there wasn't a ton of clarity on who was supposed to get what. And that was when these two ideas really connected for me that, we were fortunate, I should say, that everyone in our family was getting along, maybe to the point of inefficiency where nothing was getting decided. But I've heard a lot of stories since, including on some podcasts I've listened to, of people fighting over everything, things as crazy as a vacuum to pieces of art that everyone wanted that one piece in the family room. So what we're trying to do is bring some clarity to the conflict that comes out of those moments.
So you have this idea. It's a really, really interesting, cool idea. And like I said, you sort of done this before and, a while ago when, tech was different. And now, the advent of AI, comes into play. And was that at the top of mind where you can build this with AI, where it's like, image sort of detection and easily sort of stored into a database. And once you have a database, AI is really, really powerful. Yeah. I guess talk about the first, few months after that, really making the decision to actually dive back into building something and those early days of like what that product development sort of looked like and how maybe AI was maybe at the foundation of it, of building this, if it even was.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me go back to this moment where I opened the drawer and I found all these documents. And I thought to myself, okay, I should really catalog this. And the first thing I did was opened up a spreadsheet and I
Yep.
just started to create column ABC and different rows and debating which way to, not to productize it in the moment, but to create my database.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was getting frustrated because, a piece of art versus a piece of jewelry, I needed different columns. And then on top of that, I'd look at the document sometimes and I was like, what does this thing actually look like if I'm going to try and just describe it? So then
Yeah.
I'd run to the other room to try and take a picture of whatever the item was, and then come back to my spreadsheet. As I'm going through this, I'm like, I'm not even going to finish this. This is
Yeah.
such a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So naturally, as I started to think about, and I should clarify, Graham, like when I started this as a venture, I wasn't even sure if it would be a business. This was
Sure.
just more of a
Yeah.
pet project at first. And I was curious, given a lot of the things that we've all seen from a, AI product recognition perspective. Open your phone and Google now has their Google Lens. You open Amazon and you need to get more deodorant and you literally
Yep.
scan the
Yeah.
barcode for your deodorant and it knows the right one. So all these things that we see in our consumer lives to me felt very achievable in terms of what we want to do with the product. So what we ended up building, to your question, is we built the ability to say, okay, we're going to just start with a photo. And the beauty of that is whether you're taking the photo or you have it in your camera roll, you open up our app, the Trusty app, and say that you have anything as fancy as a beautiful Birkin purse, piece of art, no matter who the artist is, or even a pair of, high-end sneakers that you want to grab a pic of, what we're doing is we're using AI in the background to look at that image and fill in all that information that I was trying to feed into a spreadsheet. And, we're not necessarily going to get it right every time, but we're finding like over 90% accuracy in terms of the photo to the fields that we capture.
Mm-hmm.
What's really important there is, and just to answer you in terms of how we're technically doing this, we're using Google Gemini as the underlying LL.
Okay.
Look at that image. At the time when we made the choice, a lot of that had to do with Google just being better at being able to look at images, given the images that Google had access to. I mean, those things are changing, and we're looking at ways to pull in the best model on the fly, which is starting to become more of a function, although it can be expensive. But back to what we wanted to accomplish is we wanted to remove that frustration of a user sitting there having to say, like, what information do I gather or not gather? And how do I know, depending on the asset, what those things are for our columns, if you think about it? So
Yep.
why we're, I know not everyone can see as they're listening to this on a podcast, but behind me, and I'm going to play around with my camera for a minute. Like this piece of art, this was here even before I started the business. This was my wife's grandmother's art that got left to us. And if I go down, that chair was my grandfather's, right?
Very cool.
These don't necessarily have tremendous value to anyone, but they're really important items for us. And they're items we want to make sure go to our next generation as well. So the beauty is if I take a photo of that piece of art versus the chair, the next fields that show up once we identify the category are going to be different. And the same thing for a baseball card, the same thing for a nice bottle of wine, for a Birkin handbag, like we've said, even a collector car. And we're able to fill those fields in for you at that high degree of accuracy, given that this is an app really, I can say less so for the collector and more so for the person who's thinking about how do I assign the things that matter to me to that next generation.
So this is the executor maybe doing the actual physical like work, or is it a family member? I guess every family dynamic is completely different. But again, I know circumstances are going to be completely different, but maybe a couple use cases.
The answer for us right now is that there is no right answer here.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to support, let's call it the entire life cycle. The way we've been thinking about it at Trusty is that the first moment where you really start to generate wealth usually comes when you own a home or you're renting or something of the sort, and you start to fill that home with things that belong to you, right? That's huge difference versus, you're living at your parents' house, and you don't really start to accumulate things that are personal valuable assets. Now, the chances of us convincing someone in their late 20s or early 30s to start to think proactively might be a reach, but there are people who are going to do it.
Yep.
Ideally, at some point along that lifespan, whether it's when you first have children, whether it's when the kids move out and you start to think about downsizing, there's all these moments where we start to think about what do we have in value and who do we want to have it next, right? It may even be aligned with when you first create a will. That said, there's people who are going to procrastinate this. And at that point, it may not even be them doing this. It may be, as you said, either an executor doing it on their behalf or their children doing it on their behalf. We're trying to plan for all those different scenarios. We've built the app so that someone can do this proactively. And some of the things that's really special in the app and kind of skipping, not to lessen the importance of AI, but one of the things that everyone loves in the app, if you will, this is maybe the most good in terms of disruption that we're doing, even without AI, is that after I upload, say, my engagement ring and we extract all that information with AI, we give you the opportunity to assign that to an heir, right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, what we're trying to, first of all, do just at the court is be the digital letter of wishes. So every will often refers to a letter of wishes so that as we update items on the fly in our life, we don't have to go back to the lawyer each time.
Yeah.
These things are literally usually done on a piece of paper, right? They're designed to sit outside the will for a whole bunch of reasons around probate, your will becoming a public document, a number of different factors. This is kind of the best way to do it. And the problem with that piece of paper, it often doesn't end up with a date on it. It often lacks context. It often gets questioned in terms of, the state of mind of the individual.
Yep.
Well, so we ended up finding this beautiful way to actually counter all of those and even go a level above. And that is, you can create a video wish for whoever you're assigning that to. So if my wife's engagement ring is going to go to my daughter, and I've got two other
Gotcha.
kids who are boys that, they're going to my daughter for whatever reason, the idea might be that she's explaining, I'm assigning this to you and here's why. As soon as you do that, you have that clarity, you have that emotional moment, you have this, note to the next generation. And that's, one of the parts that, people just seem to really get gushy over and love, and, for good reason. So I think that there's this element of blending AI with just a very emotional product at the same time.
And I think that the interesting thing that I looked at a lot lately is as we all grow older, right, we're sort of digitally native, like not your 104-year-old grandma was probably not, right? But as we age, right, this is going to be a tool that natively we might be able to use at 90, right? We might be able to, well, probably will be able to kind of do this, like you said, preemptively, where, we can kind of do these things and do the videos and sort of take the pictures. Because one thing my 94-year-old grandma has, she has a lot of time, and she moves well, and she's healthy for, relatively for a 94-year-old. So I imagine when I'm her age and, I'm pretty, digitally native and savvy, that, I'll be able to do a lot of this, where it's that preemptive thing that I think matters. Because the biggest thing that I saw and looking over some stuff is the transfer of wealth that is going to happen, the next, I don't know, decade or two is quite insane. $84 trillion is kind of what you guys look at. That is just unheard of. Like, it's just a number that you can't really quantify. And that's probably just in assets that are known, right? Whether it's equities and stock and real estate. We're not even counting like you said, whether it's sneakers or shoes or purses or, a really good baseball or basketball card, right? That's probably not even counting that as in this. But I guess talk about that. When you were going down this road, did you have an idea of this sort of transfer of wealth period that we're in? And did that just sort of motivate you a bit more to sort of get this right and build it?
So to answer you in this complete honesty, like when I started doing this, I was just trying to fill a personal need and some personal time
Yep.
myself.
Yeah.
So I always like solving for things that just drive me nuts, things that I look at, I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And because I think I'm the average consumer, I'm maybe a little bit more organized than some.
Yep.
But, I think those things, and I've learned in talking to a lot of people that these are things that keep you up at night. When you have the time to think about it. And even beyond there, and we should touch on this just on your last question. We are also planning for those who support you outside of your immediate family. So your personal advisors. And we've actually built a
Yeah.
whole product in the background so that you can share this information with those people. And I think that bridges the last point you were hitting on, Grant, which is there's so much in our wealth picture that's not captured. When you talk to a wealth advisor, a banker, an insurance broker, someone who's looking at your family office of sorts, even if you're of that high net worth, they're often looking at more financial assets. These modern days, they'll look at other digital assets and even getting into
Mm-hmm.
crypto, things of that sort. Or they'll look at a real estate investment or your personal property, and they'll try and capture this picture of your wealth. And back to this moment of death, the things that end up tearing families apart the most are usually not those for a couple of reasons. One, the will does a good job at defining, as long as there is a will, at defining who's supposed to get what, right? There may be some jealousy and animosity as to who got what, but it's pretty clear. The part that people fight over or relationships are torn for no good reason is just the lack of clarity around these wishes and what people are set to inherit. I met with a trust organization that helps both with executorship as a service. And they were telling me this story, and we'll just call the family the Smiths for now, where there was tremendous wealth. We're talking like millions of dollars in art alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it simply said the art will be divided amongst the three kids. And there was, I guess, a difference in taste from one generation to the next. Essentially, wanted none of the art except for one piece. The only piece they wanted was the piece that was in the dining room where they had dinner every Sunday night as a family for years. And all three kids said, that's the only piece I want. Everyone else can have the other pieces. And fast forward to the end, this went to court over who should get the piece. Now, imagine there was this video. Imagine there was this clarity.
Yeah.
Maybe there was some
Yeah.
sort of condition of it rotating. Maybe the condition was whoever gets the art has to host dinner. I don't know what the answer,
Yeah.
but I think that's the problem is we don't know these things because they're not captured. And so what we're trying to do, back to this, mindset of disruption for good, is just bring clarity to these tough situations. And back to your point, when I started to understand the amount of wealth that is going to transfer, that 84 trillion,
Yeah.
is a wild number. And that's just in the next decade or so. It made me realize that this is just going to be one issue, and that most wealth advisors just aren't equipping their clients. So what we've been doing is having conversations with wealth advisors who are excited to introduce Trusty to their clients as a way to broaden the conversation to other asset classes that are usually not covered in that story.
As we're thinking about this and the product starting to crystallize a bit more and just, looking at certain things, and I talk to a lot of people from across all sectors, but the one thing I see is the nonprofit sector is starting to have a lot of cool technology built around it. As I'm looking at this, like you said, sort of traditional assets, the wills, they do a really good job, right? A person could say, hey, I'm going to donate X amount of money to this nonprofit that I, really admire and respect. And that's in the will, right? That's clarified a bit more. But like these messages, right? That's a really cool part where if a person does donate, it might not be an assets like stocks or real estate, or it could be a piece of art, right? So it's not necessarily like instant monetary value, but it's an asset that now the nonprofit has, right? But there might be a story behind that. So the person can say, why I'm giving this to this organization. And she or he might have multiple things that they give away like that could have this really interesting story behind it, and also gives value to the nonprofit. So that's another like cool feature I think y'all could be messing around with eventually, is like,
Yeah, we've
giving an
actually,
aspect within it, right? It's cool.
it's actually been really interesting. We've had a number of different charities reach out to us
Yeah.
proactively before, I'll be honest, we had thought enough about it. And what we've already built since then is, to take a step back and understand in the app, the app is not, Grant's app and Grant's safe that no one can access. If it was, it really serves no purpose, right? Like you get hit by a bus, as they say,
Yep.
and this thing is as secure as it gets from a banking security mindset. 2FA, biometric login. We encrypt all the data so not even our team can see what you have. I mean, this is personal stuff. So the key though is that you can safely share this information with people. And the most common people to share with is a co-owner, such as a spouse, your children, your executor, and as I said, some of your professional advisors who you trust. And once you start to do that, now you're bringing everyone in to understand this. Now, to your point, one of the things that we learned on Charities is that sometimes we may not want that art to go to our kids, either because we didn't want it to go to our kids, we didn't love them in the end. I don't know what that drama may be. Or, like I said earlier, it's just not their taste. How do you start to designate this stuff? So we created the ability to actually name charities as who will inherit some of these items.
Yeah.
And you can either say, okay, great, they're to go to the charity once they're sold by the estate, or we're just donating some
Gotcha.
assets directly to the charity, and the charity will accommodate the sale through their own means.
The one thing I want to go back to and dig a little into the nerdy stuff, if you will, is you mentioned using Gemini as sort of the underlying LLM for a lot of things. Since you've probably started, I mean, obviously I move so fast. Google itself has created probably now the best suite of AI products on the market. And so they're sort of really doing a lot of things. As you see sort of AI moving so fast, how do you, as like a founder and person leading team, like stay concentrated on building and not sort of like go off into like monkey mind and say, oh, this is new AI thing came out, let's build this, you start to get so overwhelmed a little bit. How do you and the team sort of stay concentrated to build, and stay focused on building the product that you intended to build?
Maybe worth me calling out. Aside from having started a venture before this and now this one, I also invest in some businesses. And I'm not really into investing in companies that are like, I'm an AI this, right? Like yeah. And that's not what we think of ourselves either. If you go to our website, we've got a very simple tagline, which is being the trusted way to share your wishes. Right now, we're looking at ways using AI to make that a better experience. And 5-10 years ago in my last business, when AI wasn't necessarily a thing, we were still looking at using data, but in much more basic ways. And whatever's going to come next, we'll look to infuse that into the process. So back to your question on how do we try and center ourselves? It's really listening to consumers. And when I say consumers, in our case, it's a combination of both the consumer and the advisor, because we have two different products here, one for the consumer, one for the advisor. So I'll give you an interesting example of something that took us in a different road, and then we layered AI on top of it, which was we're essentially building, as we've called it so far, this digital letter of wishes, right? I want my collector car to go to my son, and I want my jersey collection to go to my other son, and that's how they're going to be equal. Because we're so tied to the estate plan as a whole, one of the things we heard people asking for is, could you store the will in the app as well? Like if you're going to have the letter of wishes and I can pull that up and I'm going to introduce my executor to this, why wouldn't you have the will there? And my first answer to that was like, well, that's just going to be a crappy experience. We're doing all this cool thing to take a photo and recognize it. What am I going to have? Like this crappy Dropbox folder
PDF and
it's not going to be very exciting. But then we started to think about, as you said, like what could we do with AI that would take that, address the core value, but kind of take it to the next level. So when you upload your will or your estate plan, power of attorney documents, things of that nature, which we make possible in the app, we don't just store it, as a link or a PDF. We actually interpret that will we're using Google Gemini there as well as the underlying LLM. We extract certain structured data from that to help you quickly search and say, okay, great, this is my will. It's from this date. It's the most recent version. Share it with the key people. But we also generate an AI summary. Most people, even if they can find their will, it's written in such legalese that they can't understand what it actually means. So we create this really short, brief overview. And then we've also built in, using the term agentic, which is this idea of using AI as an agent that you can speak to. We've built in an AI agent into the app where you can ask any question about your will. So you could ask
love it.
Something as simple as who's the executor, to what's my son Ethan supposed to inherit versus my daughter Lila. And where we're going with that longer term is that it can give an answer that's not just representative of what's in your will, but representative of all the different wishes that you've put into the Trusty app. So you may be able to say, great, my daughter Lila is getting the engagement ring. She's getting the following percentage according to the will. And that's the story for her. And how do you want to make other adjustments to equalize the different beneficiaries that you have? So that's, we're still a couple steps away from tying that whole story together. But when I say it's a couple of steps, this isn't, one day in the future. This is 1 month in the future.
I'll end on a couple questions here. The first would be, what's the business model?
So we've got a pretty bold thesis here, which is that everyone should be doing this, but no one's going to pay for it. Which investors actually liked when we told them this. And the key there is that we've built an amazing, as I say, consumer app. Like I encourage people to go download it from the App Store, whether you're on iOS or Android. In October of 2025, just to date this podcast either to the future or the past, when people listen to it, the app will actually go from being a freemium model to being a free model. Meaning you can use this app, you can upload as many different assets in your home, your will, your power of attorney documents. Eventually, we're getting into life insurance documents and general insurance documents. And the ability to use this app as your digital safe for your wealth. That will be free. The way we monetize is the connections that you make with your trusted advisors. So whether that's someone at your bank, whether it's a financial planner that you use, an insurance broker, down the line, even, your estate lawyers, as I mentioned, down the line, other professionals that we're bringing in around appraisal products. So there's going to be other vendors who you work with and you trust, who you will choose to share your data with. and who can advise you on other steps. They will be paying a license model to have access to the product that we built that's more of a desktop experience.
Gotcha.
So we've got the mobile app that works on iOS and Android devices that's a consumer-free product. And then we've got a browser-based experience where advisors can better understand their clients, and we make money on the advisor relationship that exists.
Last question I have is just, about the future. And if we look maybe 3 to 5 years down the line, what are some of the goals and successes you and the team would like to achieve?
Yeah. So, listen, you hear a lot of people say that everyone should have a will, and I couldn't agree more. We want to be the wishes around every will that's out there. Whether you're working with really innovative companies like Trust and Will in the US, there's versions of that like Willful and Epilogue in Canada who do similar, and they're making a will accessible to anyone in the mass market. And then you have really impressive law firms with, who can do more advanced planning. We want to be the solution that sits a lot aside any plan across, any will that exists there. From there, we just want to make sure that this idea of next generation wealth is seamless and it's conflict free. One of the things that we're, still so early, we haven't dealt with someone passing yet who's using our app.
Wow.
That's to come. And we want to make sure that when we do that we're removing conflict and we're bringing joy, right? Like I showed you behind me that I've got these items that for each of my wife and I, like they bring joy, right? That we have these things and we know the story. I was chatting with, I'll finish with a quick story, which is I ran into a friend of mine, and I'm not a watch guy. I'm not a big watch guy. But because I've seen a lot of people upload watches into this app, I couldn't notice that he's wearing a very cool watch. And I just said to him, I'm like, really cool watch. What's the story? And he choked up and he said, my dad left me this watch when he passed away a couple of years ago. I wear it to any event. We were at this event. And I said, oh, it's beautiful. I said, what's the backstory? He goes, I know nothing other than he wanted me to have it. So I wear it just because it was his. And I didn't pitch him Trusty. I just sat there and I thought to myself, like, this would be an even better story if he knew how his dad came across this watch, why his dad wanted him to have this watch, right? And those moments are the parts that get me excited, right? And me and my wife have a lot of those items in our home where we want to make sure that certain items don't end up in a dump. They end up, cherished by our next generation. So I think this idea of wealth transfer can be defined in different ways. And, sometimes it's just the stories that we're excited to tell.
It's, man, as we're talking, it's such an amazing point because the decision to make the app free to everybody, I don't know if it was a tough decision for you guys, but like that is a real decision to make that can have some really interesting impacts because it allows anybody, not everybody comes from, a wealth background and have sort of quote unquote, stuff to asset wise to give down. But like you had mentioned, it just might be an emotional asset. It might be something that's super important to them. And I couldn't imagine like having my mom on video saying she wanted me to have something. It might not be of value at all, right? But instead of maybe, putting it in an attic or giving it away to somebody else or whatever it might be, right? That becomes a like treasured thing in your life. It has nothing to do with money. It doesn't have nothing to do with your background. The idea that anybody can sort of start to create these family memories of some sort of just having things to give away and having a story behind them. I think, man, that is actually the coolest thing out of what we talked about is having that ability to kind of catalog that stuff for whoever's important in your life. And again, it might not have a monetary value, but
yeah, we're adding that in right now, actually, Grant, which
it's so cool.
It came from user feedback, and we currently have the ability to put a dollar valuation, and you can track updates in dollar valuation. And we have ways down, back to AI where we could be able to say like, oh, the latest price of this is this according to, AI sources that we're able to track. But the part again that people have been more interested in that we're launching very, very soon, like it's under development right now, is the simplest feature. And it's just going to be 1 to 5 hearts of how valued this is from a sentimental and to your point, it could be something as simple as a framed photo of your grandparents, and their immigration story or their heritage or whatever the case be. And those are the items that we're trying to figure out, like, how do you make sure that those don't get lost? And that the story behind that is passed on.
Amazing, Randy. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. The best of luck to you and the team, man, and congrats on building the product you've built so far. And can't wait to see the next decade.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks for having me on here.